The rain fell in sheets over the small town of Cedar Falls, Oregon, turning the streets into rivers of grey water and broken reflections. Most people had the sense to stay inside on a night like this, but not everyone had a home worth staying in. Jack Reeves sat on the bench outside the old hardware store, his weathered army surplus jacket soaked through, water dripping from the brim of his faded baseball cap. He didn't seem to notice the cold. He didn't seem to notice much of anything anymore. The bench had become his spot over the past year. Mr. Patterson, who owned the hardware store, never chased him away. Once he'd even brought Jack a cup of coffee and sat with him for a few minutes, not saying anything, just sitting. Jack had appreciated that more than he could express. Most people wanted to talk, wanted to fix him, wanted to understand. Mr. Patterson just let him be. At 42 years old, Jack looked 60. His beard was unkempt, his eyes hollow, the kind of eyes that had seen things no human should ever have to see. Once, those eyes had been sharp, focused, belonging to one of the most decorated Navy SEALs in his unit's history. Now they stared at nothing, seeing everything and nothing at the same time. He'd been a warrior once. Team leader of SEAL Team 4, multiple deployments, commendations that could fill a wall. His men had trusted him with their lives, and he'd never let them down, until the day he did, until the day everything went wrong. The nightmares had started 3 years ago after his last mission, the one that had taken everything from him, his team, his purpose, his will to live. He'd been medically discharged, given a handful of medals and a pat on the back, and sent out into a world he no longer recognized. The mission had been routine, or so they'd thought. Intelligence on a high-value target in a remote village. Jack had led his 6-man team through the darkness, moving with the precision that years of training had drilled into them. Martinez on point, Jackson covering the rear, O'Brien and Davis on the flanks, Williams right behind Jack. They'd been brothers, all of them, not by blood, but by something deeper. They'd trained together, bled together, celebrated birthdays and anniversaries and the births of children together. Martinez had been planning his wedding. Jack was supposed to be his best man. Jackson had just found out his wife was pregnant with their 4th child. O'Brien had finally paid off his truck and wouldn't stop talking about it. They'd walked into an ambush. The intelligence was wrong, or worse, it had been a setup. The first explosion took out Martinez and O'Brien before Jack could even shout a warning. The second caught Jackson and Davis as they tried to retreat. Williams had pushed Jack behind cover, taking 3 bullets meant for his team leader. "Keep going, Chief," Williams had gasped, his blood soaking into the dirt. "Get out, tell my wife, tell her." He'd never finished the sentence. Jack had watched the light leave his eyes, watched his best friend die in his arms, and something inside him had shattered beyond repair. Jack had survived. Only Jack. He'd fought his way out alone, killing 17 enemy combatants in a blood-soaked hour that would later earn him a Navy Cross. But he didn't feel like a hero. Heroes don't let their brothers die. The VA had tried to help. Therapists, medication, group sessions, nothing worked. Jack had built walls so high and so thick that no one could get through. Eventually, he'd stopped trying. Stopped going to appointments, stopped answering calls, stopped caring. His wife had left first, unable to reach the man who'd come home in her husband's body. "You're not Jack anymore," she'd said, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know who you are, but you're not my husband. I can't keep living with a ghost." The divorce papers had arrived 2 months later. Jack had signed them without reading them. His parents, elderly and confused by their son's transformation, had eventually stopped calling. His friends from the teams had tried. God, they'd tried. But Jack had pushed them all away. Every connection was a reminder of what he'd lost, and he couldn't bear the weight of it. Now he lived on the streets of Cedar Falls, a ghost of the man he'd once been. The locals knew him as the veteran. The quiet man who never caused trouble but never smiled either. They left food for him sometimes, blankets in winter, small kindnesses that Jack accepted without acknowledgement. He'd chosen Cedar Falls because it was far from anywhere he'd ever been, far from anyone who'd ever known him. A place where he could disappear completely, where no one would ask questions or expect anything from him. A place where he could wait for death in peace. Tonight, the rain was particularly brutal. Jack should have sought shelter, but he couldn't bring himself to move. Moving required energy, energy required hope, and hope was something Jack Reeves had abandoned long ago. He sat there, letting the rain wash over him, wondering if this would be the night hypothermia finally took him. Part of him welcomed the thought. It would be an end, at least. A release from the endless loop of guilt and grief that had become his existence. He'd be with his team again if there was anything after this life. And if there wasn't, well, at least the pain would stop. "Mister, are you okay?" The voice was small, barely audible over the rain. Jack didn't respond at first, assuming he'd imagined it. Voices were common for him, echoes of the past, screams of the dying, commands from officers long dead. Martinez calling his name, Williams asking for covering fire, O'Brien cracking jokes that weren't funny but made everyone laugh anyway. "Mister?" This time Jack looked up. Standing before him, holding a bright yellow umbrella that was clearly too big for her, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with curly red hair plastered to her face and green eyes that seemed to glow in the dim streetlight. She was wearing rain boots with cartoon frogs on them and a purple jacket that was buttoned up wrong, one side higher than the other. She looked completely out of place on this dark, miserable street, like a splash of color in a black and white photograph. "You're getting all wet," she said matter-of-factly. "That's not good. My mom says you can catch a cold if you stay in the rain too long." Jack stared at her, unsure how to respond, or how to... It'd been months since anyone had spoken directly to him, looked him in the eye, treated him like a person rather than a problem to be avoided. "Where's your mom?" His voice was rusty from disuse, rough as sandpaper. "She's in the store." The girl pointed to the small grocery shop across the street. "She told me to wait under the awning, but I saw you sitting here and you looked sad. You should go back to your mom." "But you're sad," the girl repeated, as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. "My mom says when people are sad, you should try to help them. That's what good people do." Jack felt something crack inside him, a fissure in the wall he'd spent years building. "I'm fine, kid, go on." The girl tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made Jack uncomfortable. "You don't look fine. You look like my dog looked before we found him. He was all alone and scared and wet. But we took him home and gave him food and love, and now he's happy. I'm not a dog." "I know that's silly." She giggled, a sound so pure and unexpected that Jack felt his throat tighten. "But everyone needs someone to care about them, even grown-ups." Before Jack could respond, a woman came rushing out of the grocery store, panic written across her face. "Lily! Lily, where are you?" She spotted her daughter, and relief flooded her features, quickly followed by concern as she saw who Lily was talking to. "Lily, come here right now." "But Mom, this man is sad. We should help him." The woman, mid-30s, tired eyes, the kind of exhaustion that spoke of single parenthood and too many bills, hurried over and grabbed her daughter's hand. "I'm sorry if she bothered you," she said to Jack, not quite meeting his eyes. "She didn't." The woman paused, surprised by his response. Most people didn't engage, didn't acknowledge the homeless as anything more than obstacles to step around. "I'm Margaret," she said after a moment's hesitation. "Margaret Chen, and this is Lily. Jack, do you have somewhere to go tonight, Jack?" "The rain's getting worse." Jack shrugged. "I'll manage." Margaret looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. She saw past the beard and the dirty clothes, saw the dog tags hanging around his neck, saw the military posture that years of homelessness hadn't quite erased. "You served," she said. It wasn't a question. "Once." Margaret bit her lip, clearly wrestling with something. Lily tugged at her hand. "Mum, we should help him. Remember what you said about helping people?" "Lily, it's not that simple. You said Daddy would want us to be kind. You said that's what he would do." The mention of Daddy made Margaret flinch, Jack noticed. He noticed everything, a habit from years of training that he couldn't turn off even when he wanted to. Margaret took a deep breath. "There's a shelter on 5th Street, St. Mary's. They have beds and hot food. If you want, I could give you a ride." "I know where it is, but you don't go." Jack didn't answer. He didn't have to. Lily broke free from her mother's grip and marched right up to Jack. Before he could react, she grabbed his hand, his rough, calloused, dirty hand, and held it in both of hers. "Please come with us," she said. "I don't want you to be cold and sad. Please." Jack looked down at the small hands wrapped around his. When was the last time someone had touched him with kindness? He couldn't remember. The contact felt foreign, almost painful, like blood returning to a limb that had been asleep too long. "Lily," Margaret started. "It's okay," Jack heard himself say. The words surprised him as much as they surprised Margaret. I'll go to the shelter." "We can drive you," Margaret offered. "No, I can walk." Jack gently extracted his hand from Lily's grip and stood. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and Margaret took an instinctive step back. But Lily didn't flinch. "Promise?" she asked. "Promise you'll go somewhere warm." Jack looked at this tiny girl with her too big umbrella and her absolute certainty that kindness could change the world. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something stir in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but something. "I promise," Lily beamed. "Okay, but I'm going to check on you. What's your last name?" "Lily, that's not—" Margaret tried. "Reeves. Jack Reeves." "Jack Reeves," Lily repeated solemnly. "I'm going to remember that. And I'm going to find you and make sure you're okay. That's what friends do." Jack almost smiled. "Almost. We're not friends, kid. You don't even know me." "Not yet," Lily said confidently, "but we will be. I can tell." Margaret gathered her daughter and her groceries, shooting Jack an apologetic look as she guided Lily toward their car. But at the last moment she turned back. "The shelter closes at 9, she said. "You've got an hour." Jack nodded. He watched them drive away, the yellow umbrella visible through the rear window, until the car turned a corner and disappeared. He stood there in the rain for a long moment. Then, for the first time in months, Jack Reeves started walking with purpose. St. Mary's Shelter was a converted church on 5th Street, its stained glass windows glowing warm against the stormy night. Jack hesitated at the door, his hand hovering over the handle. He'd been here before, once, early in his time on the streets. The well-meaning volunteers, the pitying looks, the questions he couldn't answer. It had all been too much. He'd left before morning and hadn't been back since, but he'd made a promise to a 7-year-old girl with an umbrella and an unshakable belief in human kindness. Jack pushed open the door. The interior was warm and dry, filled with the smell of soup and fresh bread. Rows of cots lined the main hall, most already occupied by men and women seeking refuge from the storm. A few volunteers moved between them, offering blankets and kind words. "Can I help you?" Jack turned to see a middle-aged man in a clergy collar approaching him. The man had kind eyes and a gentle smile that didn't waver when he took in Jack's appearance. "I'm Father Thomas. Welcome to St. Mary's. I need a bed, just for tonight." "Of course. Let's get you signed in, and then we can find you something to eat. You look like you could use a hot meal." Jack followed Father Thomas to a small desk near the entrance, where he filled out a simple form with basic information: name, age, military service. Father Thomas glanced at the form. "Navy? SEALs?" The priest's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't comment. "We have a few other veterans here tonight. Good men going through hard times." "You're not alone, Jack." Jack didn't respond. He'd heard that line before, from therapists and counselors and well-meaning civilians who couldn't possibly understand. "You're not alone." But he was. He'd been alone since the day his team died, and he survived. Father Thomas led him to a cot near the back of the hall, away from the main bustle. "This one's a bit quieter. "I noticed you seemed like you might prefer some space." Jack nodded his thanks and sat on the edge of the cot. The mattress was thin but clean, the blanket warm. It was more comfort than he'd had in weeks. "Kitchen's open for another hour if you want food," Father Thomas said, "and there's a shower in the back. Clean clothes in the donation bin if you need them." "Why are you doing this?" The question came out before Jack could stop it. Father Thomas smiled. "Because everyone deserves kindness, Jack. Everyone deserves a chance. God doesn't give up on his children, even when they give up on themselves." He left Jack alone with his thoughts, which was both a blessing and a curse. The thoughts were never kind. They replayed the same scenes over and over: the explosion, the screams, the blood. His team, his brothers, dying while he survived. The guilt was a weight on his chest that never lifted. Jack thought about the shower, about clean clothes. When was the last time he'd been truly clean? Weeks, months. He'd stopped counting. Cleanliness had seemed pointless, just another thing to maintain in a life he no longer wanted to live. But now, sitting on this cot, in this warm shelter, he felt something shift. The little girl's face kept appearing in his mind. Her absolute certainty that he was worth helping, her insistence on being his friend. He got up and walked to the back of the shelter where the showers were. The bathroom was small but clean, with fresh towels stacked on a shelf and basic toiletries available for use. Jack stripped off his wet clothes he'd been wearing for days, and stepped under the hot water. The sensation was almost overwhelming. Heat cascading down his body, washing away weeks of grime and sweat and pain. He stood there for a long time, letting the water run over him, feeling something loosen in his chest. When he finally emerged, wrapped in a towel, he found clean clothes waiting for him in the donation bin. Jeans, a flannel shirt, thick socks. They didn't fit perfectly, but they were dry and warm and didn't smell like the streets. He looked at himself in the mirror, at the gaunt face staring back at him. He barely recognized himself. The man he'd been, strong, confident, capable, seemed like a character from someone else's story. Jack made his way back to his cot, feeling almost human for the first time in years. The simple acts of showering and changing clothes had taken more out of him than he expected, and he collapsed onto the thin mattress with a bone-deep exhaustion. But tonight, alongside the guilt, there was something else. A little girl's voice, asking him to promise, tiny hands wrapped around his, green eyes that saw him as a person, not a problem. Jack lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling. The sounds of the shelter surrounded him, soft conversations, the clatter of dishes being washed in the kitchen, someone coughing a few cots over. Normal sounds, living sounds. For the first time in 3 years, he slept without nightmares. Morning came grey and damp, the storm having passed, but leaving the world waterlogged in its wake. Jack woke, disoriented, the unfamiliar sensation of a roof over his head and a pillow under his head, making him momentarily forget where he was. Then he remembered. The rain, the little girl, the promise. He sat up and looked around. Most of the other occupants were still asleep, lumps under blankets, the occasional snore breaking the silence. A few early risers were lined up at the kitchen window, where volunteers were serving breakfast. Jack's stomach growled. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a real meal. He made his way to the kitchen, accepting a tray with scrambled eggs, toast and orange juice. The food was simple but hot, and Jack found himself eating faster than he intended, his body remembering what his mind had tried to forget, that it needed fuel to survive. "Mind if I sit?" Jack looked up to see another man, roughly his age, with a military short haircut, and the same haunted look Jack saw every time he passed a mirror. "Free country," Jack said. The man sat down across from him. "Name's Rodriguez, Mike Rodriguez, Marines, 2 tours in Afghanistan." "Jack Reeves, Navy." "Yeah, I figured. You've got that look." Mike took a bite of his toast. "Father Thomas mentioned you were a SEAL. That's some serious stuff." Jack didn't respond. "I get it," Mike continued. "Don't much like talking about my service either. But sometimes it helps, you know. Talking to someone who gets it. No one gets it. Maybe not completely. But we get closer than the civilians do. Mike sipped his juice. How long you been on the streets? 3 years, give or take. Mike whistled low. That's a long time. You ever try the VA? Tried, didn't take. Yeah, they mean well, but they don't always know how to help guys like us. Too much red tape, not enough understanding. Mike leaned forward. There's a group that meets here on Thursdays, veterans, all of us dealing with our own demons. No pressure, no judgment, just guys talking. You might consider checking it out. Jack pushed his empty tray away. I'm not much of a talker. Neither was I. Still not most days. But showing up is half the battle, right? Isn't that what they drilled into us? Jack didn't have a response to that. It was true. The military had taught him that presence mattered, that showing up was a form of commitment. He'd forgotten that somewhere along the way. Think about it, Mike said, standing. Thursdays, 7 p.m., basement meeting room, doors always open. He walked away, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts once again. The next few days passed in a blur. Jack stayed at the shelter, partly because it was warm and partly because he'd made a promise. He didn't know if the little girl, Lily, would actually come looking for him, but the idea that she might kept him rooted in place. He showered, accepted clean clothes from the donation bin, even let one of the volunteers trim his beard into something less wild. The face that stared back at him from the bathroom mirror was still gaunt, still haunted, but recognizably human again. On Thursday evening, almost against his will, Jack found himself descending the stairs to the basement meeting room. The stairs creaked under his weight, each step feeling like a commitment he wasn't sure he could keep. He could turn around. He could walk out right now, and no one would judge him. But Mike's words kept echoing in his head. Showing up is half the battle. About a dozen men sat in a circle of folding chairs, most of them around Jack's age, all of them carrying the same invisible weight. Mike Rodriguez was there, and he nodded when he saw Jack. Glad you came, brother. Jack took a seat at the edge of the circle, close to the door in case he needed to escape. His heart was pounding, his palms sweating. This was more people than he'd been around in years, and every instinct told him to run. The meeting was led by a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen. Jack noticed the last name and wondered if it was a coincidence, who introduced herself as a trauma specialist who volunteered her time. We don't have an agenda here, she said. This is just a space to share, to listen, to be heard. Whatever you're comfortable with, there's no pressure to speak, no judgment, no expectations. You can just sit and listen, if that's what you need. For the first hour, Jack just listened. Stories of combat, of loss, of the impossible transition from soldier to civilian. Stories of nightmares and flashbacks and the bottle that promised relief but only delivered more pain. Stories of families lost, marriages crumbled, children who no longer recognized their own fathers. A man named Pete, Army infantry, talked about the night he'd watched his best friend die from an IED. His voice was steady, practiced. He'd told this story before, but his eyes held the same haunted look Jack saw in his own reflection. Another man, Carlos, spoke about coming home to a wife who'd moved on, a house that had been sold, a daughter who called another man Daddy. His voice cracked on that last word, and no one judged him for the tears that followed. A younger veteran, barely 30, talked about the pills he'd been taking, not prescription, not legal, and how they were the only thing that made the memories bearable. His admission was met not with condemnation, but with understanding. Others nodded. Others had been there too. Jack heard his own story in every voice. The details were different, but the core was the same. They had all been broken by war, and none of them knew how to put the pieces back together. When the meeting ended, Jack slipped out quickly, avoiding eye contact. His heart was racing, his chest tight. It had been too much, too many feelings, too many memories, too much reality. But Mike caught up with him at the top of the stairs. Hey, you did good in there, just showing up takes guts. I didn't say anything. You don't have to, not until you're ready. The point is you were present. That's more than a lot of guys can manage. Jack nodded, unsure what to say. Same time next week? Mike asked. Jack hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded again. Saturday morning, Jack was sitting on the shelter's front steps, watching the town wake up, when a familiar yellow umbrella caught his eye. Lily was skipping down the sidewalk, her mother Margaret hurrying to keep up. The little girl's face lit up when she spotted Jack. "I told you I'd find you," she shouted, breaking into a run. "Mom, look, it's Jack. I told you he'd be here." Margaret caught up, slightly out of breath. "Lily, you can't just run off like that." She stopped when she saw Jack, her expression shifting from exasperation to something softer. "You look better." Jack ran a hand over his trimmed beard. "Got cleaned up." "He kept his promise," Lily said proudly, as if Jack's presence was a personal victory. "I knew he would." Margaret smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "We were on our way to the farmer's market. Would you like to join us?" Jack's first instinct was to refuse. Social situations, crowds, normal life, these were things he'd avoided for years. But Lily was looking at him with those big green eyes, so full of hope and expectation, and he found himself unable to say no. Okay. The farmer's market was set up in the town square, a colourful collection of tents and tables, laden with produce, baked goods, and crafts. Jack walked beside Margaret and Lily, hyper-aware of his surroundings in a way that civilians never noticed, but fellow veterans would recognize instantly. His eyes scanned the crowd constantly, cataloguing faces, noting exits, tracking movement. Years of training couldn't be turned off just because the war was over. For Jack, the war was never over. Every shadow could hide a threat, every loud noise was a potential explosion, every stranger could be an enemy. But Lily's constant chatter helped ground him. Her voice was like an anchor, pulling him back to the present every time his mind tried to drift into the past. "Do you like apples?" Lily asked, tugging at his sleeve. "I love apples, the red ones, not the green ones." "Green ones are too sour. My daddy used to say I was an apple snob, but I don't even know what that means." "I like apples," Jack said. It was the truth, though he couldn't remember the last time he'd had one. On the streets, you ate what you could find. Day-old bread from the bakery dumpster, half-finished sandwiches left on park benches, whatever the soup kitchen was serving that day. "We should get some." Lily turned to her mother. "Mum, can we get apples, and maybe some of those cinnamon donuts and the honey sticks, please?" "One thing at a time, sweetie," Margaret said, but she was smiling. They made their way to a produce stand, where a friendly vendor filled a bag with red apples while chatting with Margaret. Jack stood slightly apart, scanning the crowd out of habit. He spotted another veteran almost immediately, something in the man's bearing, the way his eyes moved, the tension in his shoulders. They exchanged a brief nod, the silent acknowledgement of shared experience that only those who have served can understand. "You're doing that thing," Lily said, appearing at his side. "What thing?" "Looking around like you're trying to find bad guys." "My daddy used to do that." Jack's attention snapped to the little girl. "Your daddy was military?" Lily nodded, her expression growing serious. "He was in the army. He went to a place called Afghanistan. He didn't come back." The words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. "I'm sorry. It was 2 years ago. I was 5. Lily looked up at him. "Mom says he was a hero. He saved other soldiers, and that's why he couldn't come home, but I still miss him every day." Jack didn't know what to say. What could he say? He knew the cost of heroism better than most. He knew that the ones who paid the highest price were often the ones left behind. The wives who waited by the phone, the children who grew up with a folded flag instead of a father, the parents who buried their children. "Your dad sounds like a good man," he finally managed. "He was the best." Lily smiled, but there was sadness beneath it. "Mom says I look like him. Same hair, same freckles. She says when she looks at me, she can see him. That must be a comfort to her. Sometimes it makes her sad, though. I can tell, even when she tries to hide it. She thinks I don't notice, but I do." Lily's voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you ever make people sad just by being there?" The question struck Jack with unexpected force. He thought about his ex-wife, how she'd flinch when he walked into a room. His parents, how their eyes would fill with tears when they looked at him, not the son they'd raised, but the broken stranger who'd come home in his place. Yes, he admitted. Sometimes. Lily nodded sagely, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. It's hard, isn't it? Being a reminder. For a 7-year-old, she understood far too much. Margaret returned with the bag of apples, oblivious to the conversation that had just taken place. Ready to keep going? They wandered through the market, stopping at various stands. Jack found himself carrying bags as Margaret and Lily shopped, a simple task that felt strangely meaningful. It had been so long since anyone had trusted him with anything, even something as mundane as groceries. At one point they passed a booth selling handmade wooden toys. Lily's eyes went wide at a small carved horse. "It's so pretty," she breathed. Margaret checked the price tag and winced. "Maybe for your birthday, sweetheart." "Okay." Lily's disappointment was evident, but she didn't argue. She was a good kid, Jack realized, polite, kind, far more mature than her 7 years would suggest. War had a way of aging children, even when they never saw the battlefield. When Margaret wasn't looking, Jack slipped back to the booth and bought the horse. It cost him the last of his disability money for the month, but he didn't care. He caught up with them a few minutes later and pressed the toy into Lily's hands. "For you." Lily's face transformed into pure joy. "The horse! You got me the horse." She threw her arms around Jack's waist, hugging him tight. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Margaret's eyes glistened. "Jack, you didn't have to." "I wanted to." It was true. For the first time in years, Jack had wanted to do something for someone else. The feeling was unfamiliar, like a muscle long atrophied, beginning to remember its function. They walked back to Margaret's car, Lily chattering happily about her new horse, which she'd named Brave. Jack helped load the groceries into the trunk. "Thank you," Margaret said quietly, while Lily was distracted. "For the toy. For everything. She's been different since she met you. Happier. She's a good kid. She is. She's also stubborn and bossy and way too smart for her own good." Margaret laughed softly. "She gets that from her father." "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" Margaret was silent for a moment. "Tom was a sergeant. He was on a patrol when they got ambushed. He threw himself on a grenade to save his squad. They gave him a Medal of Honor." She paused. "I gave it to Lily. She keeps it in a special box in her room." Jack felt the familiar weight of survivor's guilt pressing down on him. "I'm sorry. Thank you. It's been hard. For both of us. But Lily, she just keeps moving forward. She has this ability to find the good in everything, even in the darkest moments. I don't know where she gets it. She gets it from having a mother who keeps going," Jack said. "Even when it hurts." Margaret looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment Jack felt seen in a way he hadn't in years. Not as a homeless veteran, not as a charity case, but as a person. A flawed, broken person, but a person nonetheless. "Would you like to come for dinner sometime?" Margaret asked. "Nothing fancy, just home-cooked food and company. Lily would love it." Jack's instinct was to refuse. Getting close to people meant risk, it meant potential pain, it meant caring about someone who might leave or die or be taken away. But then Lily bounded over, clutching her wooden horse. "Are you coming to dinner? Please say yes. I want to show you my room, and my other toys, and the picture I drew of Brave." Jack looked at this little girl who had somehow cracked open the door he'd sealed shut years ago. He looked at her mother, who carried her own grief, but hadn't let it destroy her. He thought about his empty life, his wasted years, the promise he'd made on a rainy night. "Okay," he said. "I'd like that." The following week passed faster than any Jack could remember. He attended another veterans group meeting, spoke a few words, nothing deep, just a brief introduction, and found that the world didn't end when he opened his mouth. He helped out around the shelter, fixing a leaky pipe in the bathroom and repairing a broken door hinge. Skills he'd learned in the Navy, put to use for the first time in years. On Friday evening, he walked to the address Margaret had given him, a small but tidy house on a quiet street. The yard was well kept, with flower beds that showed signs of recent planting. A child's bicycle leaned against the porch railing. Wind chimes hung from the eaves, making soft music in the evening breeze. Jack hesitated at the gate, suddenly aware of how out of place he was. What was he doing here? These people had their own problems, their own grief. They didn't need him adding to the burden. He was a mess, a work in progress, a man still learning how to be human again. He was about to turn and leave when he noticed the American flag flying from a pole in the corner of the yard. It was the kind of flag a military family would fly, crisp, properly lit, never left out in bad weather. Tom Chen had been a soldier, and his family still honored that service. Jack understood that kind of loyalty. He'd once been part of something bigger than himself, something worth dying for. He'd lost that when he lost his team, but standing here looking at that flag, he felt a flicker of connection. But before he could retreat, the front door burst open and Lily came running out. "Jack, you came! Mum, Jack's here!" She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the house with surprising strength for such a small person. "Come on, I want to show you everything." "I cleaned my room and everything." Margaret appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Lily, let the man breathe." She smiled at Jack. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." The inside of the house was warm and inviting, filled with the smell of roasting chicken and the comfortable clutter of family life. Photos lined the walls. Lily as a baby, school pictures, family vacations. Artwork clearly made by a child was displayed proudly on the refrigerator. Books were stacked on every surface, a testament to a family that valued reading. And in the center of the living room mantel, a framed photo of a man in army dress uniform. Jack stopped in front of it. Tom Chen had kind eyes, the same shape as Lily's. He was smiling, confident, the way men smile when they believe in what they're doing. Next to the photo was a folded flag in a triangular display case and a bronze star medal. "That's Daddy," Lily said, appearing at Jack's side. "He was really brave. Like you." Jack flinched. "I'm not brave." "Yes, you are. You survived, just like Mummy and me. That takes bravery." "Mrs. Harper at school says surviving is one of the bravest things a person can do. She talks to me sometimes about feelings and stuff." Jack didn't know how to respond to that. He'd never thought of survival as brave. He'd thought of it as failing to die with his team, failing to save them, failing to be worthy of being the one who walked away. "Your daddy would be proud of you," Jack said instead, because it was true. "You're a strong kid." "I know," Lily said matter-of-factly. "Mom tells me that all the time. She says I'm the strongest 7-year-old in the whole world." Dinner was simple but delicious. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. They sat around a small table, and Lily dominated the conversation with stories about school, her friends, her plans to become a veterinarian when she grew up. "I'm going to save all the animals," she declared, "even the scary ones, because every animal deserves to be loved." "Even spiders?" Jack asked, surprised to find himself engaging. Lily wrinkled her nose. "Well, maybe not spiders." "Spiders are creepy." Margaret laughed, and Jack felt the corners of his mouth twitch upward. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was closer than he'd come in years. After dinner, Lily insisted on showing Jack her room. It was painted purple, her favorite color, and filled with stuffed animals and books and drawings taped to the walls. The wooden horse Jack had bought her sat in a place of honor on her nightstand, next to a lamp shaped like a unicorn. "I named him Brave," Lily said, picking up the horse and showing Jack, "because he reminds me of you, and my daddy, and all the soldiers who are brave." Jack's throat tightened. Such a simple gesture, buying a toy horse, but it meant the world to this little girl. "And this is my reading corner," Lily continued, pointing to a beanbag chair surrounded by bookshelves. "Mom reads to me every night before bed. We're reading Charlotte's Web right now. Have you read it?" "A long time ago," Jack said. "When I was about your age. It's kind of sad but also happy, Mrs. Harper says those are the best kinds of stories, the ones that make you feel lots of different things." Lily's room was a window into her soul, colorful and chaotic and full of life. Jack noticed a bulletin board covered with photos and drawings. Lily with friends at school, Lily and Margaret at the beach, Lily holding what looked like a newborn puppy. And scattered among them, photos of Tom Chen at Lily's birthday party at Christmas, playing in the yard. "I keep pictures of Daddy everywhere," Lily explained, following his gaze. "So I can see him whenever I want. Mum says it's okay to miss him and still be happy." "Your mum's a smart lady." "I know, she's the smartest." Lily grinned. "Don't tell her I said that, though. Her head might get too big." Jack almost laughed. Almost. "And this is my special box," Lily said, pulling out a small wooden chest from under her bed. Inside, carefully arranged, was her father's Medal of Honor, along with photos, letters, and other mementos. "I keep all my daddy stuff in here, so I never forget him." Jack knelt beside her, looking at the contents of the box. A folded American flag, small enough to be a child's version, ticket stubs from a father-daughter movie date, a birthday card with "I love you, Daddy" written in crayon, a friendship bracelet made of colorful beads. "He wore this the day he left," Lily said, touching the bracelet. "I made it for him in kindergarten. He said it was his lucky charm. He was wearing it when he—" She trailed off. Jack understood. The bracelet had come home with Tom's personal effects, returned to the family, along with the flag and the medals and the hollow words of condolence. "You won't forget him," Jack said softly. "He's part of you." "That's what Mom says." Lily touched the medal gently. "Do you have anyone you're afraid of forgetting?" The question pierced through Jack's defenses like a blade. He thought of his team: Martinez, Jackson, O'Brien, Davis, Williams. 6 men who'd trusted him with their lives. 6 men who'd died while he survived. "Yes," he said quietly, "I have people. Maybe you should make a box too, so you can keep them safe." Jack looked at this 7-year-old girl with her simple wisdom and her unshakable belief in the power of love to heal wounds. She had no idea how profound her words were, how deeply they cut through years of guilt and self-hatred. He'd spent 3 years trying to forget, trying to run from the memories, trying to drink and suffer his way to oblivion. And here was a child telling him the opposite, that remembering was the way to honor the dead, not forgetting. "Maybe I should," he said. "I'll help you," Lily offered. "We can decorate it together. I have stickers." Jack smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. "I'd like that." That night, walking back to the shelter, Jack felt different, lighter somehow, as if a small portion of the weight he'd been carrying had been lifted. He still had the nightmares, still had the guilt, still had the long road of recovery ahead. But for the first time, he could see the road. For the first time, he wanted to walk it. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Jack attended veterans meetings on Thursdays, had dinner with Margaret and Lily on Fridays, and spent the rest of his time making himself useful. He got a part-time job at the hardware store, sweeping floors and stocking shelves. It wasn't much, but it was honest work, and it gave him structure. He also started talking, really talking, in the group sessions. It took weeks, but eventually the words started coming. Halting at first, then flowing like water from a broken dam. He told them about his team, about the mission that went wrong, about the 3 years he'd spent running from the memories. He told them about Martinez, who used to make everyone laugh with his terrible impressions of their commanding officer. About Jackson, who had 3 kids and showed everyone their pictures at every opportunity. About O'Brien and Davis, best friends since boot camp who finished each other's sentences. About Williams, who'd pushed Jack to safety and taken 3 bullets meant for his team leader. He told them about the guilt, the crushing, suffocating guilt of being the one who survived, the endless what-ifs that plagued his nights. What if he'd seen the ambush coming? What if he'd positioned the team differently? What if he'd been the one to take those bullets instead of Williams? He cried for the first time since the funeral, ugly sobs that shook his whole body. The other men in the circle didn't look away. They understood. They'd been there. When he was done, when the tears had dried and his breathing had steadied, Mike Rodriguez handed him a tissue and said, "Welcome back, brother." "Welcome back," Jack repeated, confused. "You've been gone a long time, man. Lost in that darkness, but you just took a big step toward finding your way out. That's what welcome back means. You're starting to come back to us, to yourself." Dr. Chen nodded in agreement. "What you did tonight, Jack, sharing your story, allowing yourself to feel the pain instead of running from it, that's incredibly brave. The path to healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to carry the memories without letting them crush you." Jack thought about that for a long time afterward. Carrying instead of being crushed. It seemed impossible, but maybe, just maybe, it wasn't. The nightmares didn't stop entirely, but they became less frequent. Jack started sleeping through the night more often than not. He started eating regular meals, gained back some of the weight he'd lost. The hollow look in his eyes began to fade, replaced by something that almost resembled life. He also started exercising again, nothing intense, just walking at first, then jogging, then running. His body remembered what it used to be capable of, even if it took time to rebuild. There was something meditative about the rhythm of his feet hitting the pavement, his breath coming steady and even. For those moments, the noise in his head quieted, and he could just exist. One morning, running through the park as the sun rose, Jack realized he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, not a lot, just a flicker, fragile and uncertain, but it was there. A tiny ember in the darkness, waiting to be fanned into flame. One Friday, about 2 months after he'd met Lily, Jack arrived at Margaret's house to find her in the kitchen, looking troubled. "Everything okay?" Margaret sighed. "Lily's having a hard day. It's the anniversary of Tom's death. She's been in her room all afternoon, won't come out." Jack's heart ached for the little girl. He knew about anniversaries, about the way certain dates could tear open old wounds, as if no time had passed at all. "Can I try talking to her?" Margaret looked surprised, then grateful. "Please. I've tried everything, but she just keeps saying she wants to be alone." Jack climbed the stairs and knocked softly on Lily's door. "Hey, kid, it's Jack." A small voice came from inside. "Go away." "I don't want to talk." "That's okay, you don't have to talk, but I'm going to sit out here in the hallway just in case you change your mind." He settled onto the floor with his back against the wall, prepared to wait as long as necessary. Through the door he could hear, sniffling, the small sounds of a child trying not to cry. After about 15 minutes, the door cracked open. Lily's face appeared, tear-streaked and red. "Did your mummy tell you what today is?" "She did." Lily opened the door wider and sat down on the threshold, facing Jack. "I miss him so much. It's not fair that he had to die." "No, it's not fair. It's never fair." "Were you there when your friends died? The ones you talk about sometimes?" Jack took a breath. "Yes, I was there." "Did it hurt?" "More than anything, it still hurts." Lily wiped her nose with her sleeve. "Does it ever stop hurting?" Jack considered the question carefully. He owed this child honesty, not platitudes. "It doesn't stop, but it changes. It gets smaller, more manageable, and eventually you can think about them and smile instead of cry. Remember the good stuff instead of just the end." "I don't want to forget the good stuff," Lily said, "but sometimes it's hard to remember." "That's what the box is for, right? Your special box?" Lily nodded. "Want to know a secret?" She looked up at him, curious. "What?" "I made a box too, like you suggested. I put photos of my team in there, and letters they wrote, and their dog tags. And when I miss them, I open the box and I talk to them, tell them about my day, what I'm doing, that kind of thing. Does it help?" "It does. It doesn't bring them back, but it makes them feel close, like they're still with me, even though they're gone." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she stood up, walked into her room, and came back with her special box. She sat down next to Jack, their shoulders touching, and opened it. "This is my daddy's Medal of Honor," she said. "He got it for being brave." "I know. Your mum told me. And this is a letter he wrote me before he left. He said no matter what happened, he'd always be with me in my heart." She handed Jack the letter, written on military stationery in neat handwriting. He read it slowly, feeling the love in every word. "My dearest Lily," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I couldn't come home like I promised. I'm sorry, baby girl, I'm so sorry, but I need you to know that you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Being your daddy has been the greatest honor of my life. Be brave, be kind, take care of your mummy. And remember, I love you to infinity and beyond, always and forever. Daddy." Jack's eyes burned. He handed the letter back to Lily with shaking hands. He sounds like he was an amazing dad. He was. Lily carefully replaced the letter in the box. "Jack." "Yeah? Are you going to stay? Like for real? Or are you going to leave like everyone else?" The question hit Jack like a bullet. He looked at this little girl who had lost so much, who had been brave enough to reach out to a stranger on a rainy night, who had somehow become the catalyst for his own healing. "I'm going to try," he said. "I can't promise everything will be perfect, or that I won't make mistakes, but I'm going to try to stay." Lily nodded, as if this was the answer she'd been hoping for. Then she did something that broke through the last of Jack's defenses. She crawled into his lap and hugged him, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "Good," she said, "because I need you to be okay. And Mommy needs you too, even if she doesn't say it." Jack held her carefully, as if she might break, this tiny human who had given him more in 2 months than he'd had in 3 years. He felt tears sliding down his cheeks and didn't try to stop them. "I need you too, kid," he whispered, "more than you know." They sat like that for a long time, until Margaret came upstairs and found them. She stood in the doorway, tears in her own eyes, and didn't say a word. She just sat down beside them and joined the hug. In that moment, in that small hallway outside a purple bedroom, something shifted. A family began to form, unconventional, unexpected, born from grief and trauma and the stubborn refusal to give up. It wasn't easy. Recovery never is. There were setbacks, days when the darkness returned and Jack couldn't get out of bed. Nights when the nightmares came back with a vengeance, when he'd wake up screaming his team's names, drenched in sweat and trembling. Moments when he wanted to run, to disappear back into the streets where no one expected anything from him. There were fights with Margaret, who sometimes struggled to understand the depth of his pain. There were times when Lily's innocent questions cut too deep, touching wounds that hadn't fully healed. There were moments of doubt, of fear, of wondering if he was making everything worse by being part of their lives. One night, about 4 months into his recovery, Jack found himself standing on the porch at 3 a.m., a bottle of whiskey in his hand. He hadn't drunk since before he went on the streets, but the craving had returned with a vengeance that night, triggered by a nightmare so vivid he could still smell the burning flesh when he woke. He stood there in the cold, staring at the bottle, weighing his options. One drink wouldn't hurt. One drink would quiet the noise in his head, would smooth the rough edges of his pain, would let him sleep without dreams. But then he thought of Lily, of the promise he'd made, of the small hands that had grabbed his in the rain and refused to let go. He poured the whiskey out on the ground and went back inside. The next morning, he told Dr. Chen about the episode in their weekly session. She wasn't disappointed or judgmental. She was proud. "That's what recovery looks like," she said. "Not never being tempted, but choosing something different when you are. Every time you make that choice, you get stronger." Jack wasn't sure he believed her, but he kept showing up. That was the key he was learning. Just keep showing up even when it hurt, even when it seemed pointless, even when every instinct screamed at him to run. But every time he felt himself slipping, he thought of Lily. Her green eyes, her unshakable faith, her simple question, "Are you going to stay?" And every time he chose to stay. 6 months after their first meeting, Jack moved out of the shelter and into a small apartment above the hardware store. His boss, Mr. Patterson, had offered it to him at a reduced rent, recognizing Jack's skills and work ethic. It wasn't much. 1 room, a kitchenette, a tiny bathroom, but it was his first real home in over 3 years. The day he got the keys, he stood in the empty apartment for a long time, just looking around. 4 walls, a ceiling, a door that locked. Things most people took for granted, but to Jack, they felt like miracles. Margaret helped him furnish it with donations from neighbors and bargains from thrift stores. Lily declared herself the official decorator and hung her drawings on every available wall. By the time they were done, the space felt almost like a home. "It needs one more thing," Lily announced, standing in the middle of the room with her hands on her hips, surveying their work with a critical eye. "What's that?" She disappeared and returned a few minutes later with a framed photo. It was a picture Margaret had taken at the farmer's market. Jack, Margaret and Lily, surrounded by bags of produce, all of them smiling. It was the first photo Jack had been in since before his last deployment. "So you remember you're not alone," Lily said, handing him the frame. Jack placed it on his nightstand, next to the box that held his team's memories. 2 boxes now, he thought. One for the past, one for the future, one for the brothers he'd lost, one for the family he'd found. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're welcome. Now come on. Mom made cake to celebrate your new place." As Jack followed Lily down the stairs to Margaret's house, he marveled at how much had changed. 6 months ago, he'd been sitting on a bench in the rain, waiting to die. Now he had a job, a home, a community. He had people who cared about him and whom he cared about in return. He had a family, not by blood, by something stronger, by choice, by love, by the simple, stubborn refusal to give up on each other. A year passed. Then another. Jack Reeves was no longer the ghost on the streets of Cedar Falls. He was Jack, the guy at the hardware store who could fix anything. Jack who led the Veterans Support Group on Thursdays. Jack who showed up to every one of Lily's school events and sat in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. He and Margaret had grown closer, their relationship deepening from friendship into something more. It happened gradually, naturally, neither of them rushing or forcing it. They understood each other's grief, each other's scars, each other's need to move forward without forgetting the past. One evening, about 2 years after the rainy night that had changed everything, Jack found himself sitting on Margaret's porch, watching the sunset. Lily was inside, doing homework, her occasional muttering about math drifting through the open window. "She asked me something yesterday," Margaret said, breaking the comfortable silence. "What?" "She asked if you were going to become her new daddy." Jack's heart stuttered. "What did you say?" "I told her that was a conversation we'd have to have as a family. All 3 of us." Jack looked at Margaret, this woman who had welcomed a stranger into her home, who had trusted her daughter's instincts, who had given Jack a reason to live when he'd forgotten how. "What do you want?" he asked. Margaret met his gaze, her eyes soft. "I want you to be happy. I want Lily to have someone she can count on. I want—" She paused, took a breath. "I want to stop being afraid of loving someone again." "I'm not Tom," Jack said quietly. "I can't replace him." "I know. I'm not asking you to." Margaret reached out and took his hand. "But maybe you can be something new, something different, something that's just ours." Jack squeezed her hand. "I'd like that." The next day, the 3 of them sat around the kitchen table and had the conversation Lily had been waiting for. Jack told her, in age-appropriate terms, that he loved her mother and wanted to be part of their family, not as a replacement for her daddy, but as an addition. Lily listened solemnly, processing the information with a maturity beyond her years. Then she asked one question. "Are you going to stay forever?" Jack knelt down so he was at her eye level. "I can't promise forever, kid. Nobody can. But I can promise that I'm going to try every single day to be there for you and your mom. I'm going to show up even when it's hard. I'm going to stay even when I'm scared, because that's what family does." Lily studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded, as if he'd passed some kind of test. "Okay," she said, "but you have to promise one more thing." "What's that?" "You have to help me with my math homework, because it's really hard and Mom keeps getting frustrated." Jack laughed. a real full laugh that surprised even him. Deal. They got married on a sunny afternoon in spring, in the backyard of Margaret's house, surrounded by friends and neighbors and fellow veterans. Lily served as the flower girl, scattering petals with enthusiastic abandon. Mike Rodriguez was the best man, standing proud in his cleanest clothes. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They wrote their own vows. Jack's was short and stumbling, his voice cracking as he tried to express what Margaret and Lily had come to mean to him. He talked about the rain, about the yellow umbrella, about the small hand that had reached out and refused to let go. Margaret cried, so did half the guests. Even Father Thomas, who was officiating, had to take a moment to compose himself. Margaret's vows spoke of second chances and new beginnings. She talked about the night Lily had come home, full of stories about the sad man on the bench, and how she'd known somehow that their lives were about to change. She talked about watching Jack transform, watching the light return to his eyes, watching him learn to live again. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Lily cheered so loud that the whole neighborhood probably heard. She'd been waiting for this moment, she announced to anyone who would listen, since the first time she'd met Jack. "I knew you'd be my new dad," she told him matter-of-factly. "And I'm very smart about these things." At the reception, Jack found himself standing to the side, watching his new family. Margaret was dancing with Lily, both of them laughing as they spun around the makeshift dance floor. The sight filled him with a warmth he'd thought he'd lost forever. Other guests swirled around them, neighbors who'd watched Jack's transformation with amazement, veterans from the support group who understood what this day meant, Father Thomas, and the volunteers from St. Mary's who'd helped Jack take his first steps back to life. They'd all played a part in this moment, this impossible, beautiful moment. Mike appeared at his side with 2 cups of punch. "Hell of a journey, brother." "Yeah," Jack accepted the cup. "Never thought I'd end up here." That's the thing about life. It surprises you. Just when you think it's over, some little girl with an umbrella shows up and changes everything. Jack smiled. "She saved my life, Mike. That night in the rain, I was ready to give up, and she just wouldn't let me. Kids are funny that way. They see things we've forgotten how to see." Mike raised his cup. "To Lily. To Lily." They drank as the party continued around them, the celebration of new beginnings and second chances. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Lily had been tucked into bed, Jack sat on the porch with his wife, looking at the stars. The same stars that had seemed so cold and distant 3 years ago now felt like old friends. "What are you thinking about?" Margaret asked, leaning against his shoulder. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am, how close I came to missing all of this. But you didn't, you showed up. Because a 7-year-old wouldn't take no for an answer." Margaret laughed softly. "That's Lily. When she decides something, there's no stopping her. She gets that from you. I'll take that as a compliment." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside the house, their home now, their daughter was sleeping peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams 8-year-olds dream. Jack thought about the journey that had brought him here. The pain, the loss, the years of darkness. He thought about the team he'd lost, the brothers who died while he survived. They were still with him, would always be with him. But now, they weren't just ghosts haunting his nightmares. They were memories, cherished and honored. He thought about Lily, about the impossible kindness of a child who saw a broken man and decided he was worth saving. About Margaret, who had opened her heart and her home to a stranger because her daughter insisted. He thought about the future, soccer games and school plays and homework battles, graduations and birthdays and family dinners, the ordinary, extraordinary moments that make up a life. "Thank you," he said suddenly. Margaret looked at him. "For what?" "For everything. For trusting Lily's instincts. For giving me a chance, for not giving up on me even when I gave you plenty of reasons to." Margaret kissed his cheek. "You're worth it, Jack Reeves. You always were. You just needed someone to remind you." From inside the house, a small voice called out, "Mommy, Jack, I can't sleep." Margaret rolled her eyes fondly. "That's our cue. They went inside together, Jack taking the stairs 2 at a time to reach Lily's room. She was sitting up in bed, her stuffed animals arranged around her like guards. "Bad dream." "No, I just wanted to say something." Jack sat on the edge of her bed. "What's that?" Lily looked at him with those green eyes that had first seen through his walls on a rainy night 3 years ago. "I'm glad you kept your promise about staying." Jack's throat tightened. "Me too, kid. And I'm glad you're my dad now. Not instead of daddy, he's still my daddy. But like an extra dad. A bonus dad." "Bonus dad," Jack repeated, smiling. "I like that." "Good." Lily lay back down, satisfied. "Now you have to read me a story. It's the rules." "What rules?" "Dad rules. You're a dad now, so you have to read bedtime stories. Everyone knows that." Jack laughed and reached for the book on her nightstand. "Okay, bonus daughter, what are we reading tonight?" As he read, his voice low and steady, Lily's eyes grew heavy. Margaret appeared in the doorway, watching them with a soft smile. The scene was so perfectly ordinary, so beautifully normal, that Jack had to pause for a moment to collect himself. This was his life now. Not the darkness, not the streets, not the endless loop of guilt and pain. This, a warm house, a family, a child asking for bedtime stories. He'd been given a second chance, and he intended to make the most of every single day. Lily fell asleep before the story ended, her breathing deep and even. Jack closed the book and sat for a moment watching her. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Thank you," he whispered, too quiet to wake her. "Thank you for saving me." He turned off the light and joined Margaret in the hallway. Together they walked to their room, their home, their future. Behind them, Lily slept peacefully, unaware that she had done something extraordinary. She had reached out to a stranger in the rain and refused to let go until he found his way back to life. Nobody could get through to the traumatized ex-Navy SEAL. The therapist couldn't. The VA couldn't. The years of medication and treatment and well-meaning intervention couldn't. But a 7-year-old girl with a yellow umbrella and an unshakable belief in human kindness did the unthinkable. She reminded him that he was worth saving, and that made all the difference. 5 years later, Jack Reeves stood at the podium of the Cedar Falls Community Center, looking out at an audience of veterans, family members, and local officials. He was here to give a speech, something that would have been unimaginable to the man sitting on that bench in the rain a lifetime ago. The room was packed. Word had spread about the veteran who'd been saved by a child, the man who'd turned his life around and now spent his days helping others do the same. Local newspapers had picked up the story. A regional TV station had done a feature. Jack had become, to his great discomfort, something of a local hero. But he wasn't here for the attention. He was here because he'd made a promise to himself, to his team, to Lily, that he would use his second chance to help others find their way back from the darkness. "When I came to Cedar Falls," he began, his voice steady, "I was broken, not just physically, not just mentally, but spiritually. I had lost my team, my purpose, my will to live. I spent 3 years on the streets, convinced that I was beyond help, beyond redemption, beyond hope." He paused, scanning the crowd until he found the faces he was looking for. Margaret, now his wife of 5 years, sitting in the front row. Beside her, Lily, now 12 years old, tall and confident, and still possessing those remarkable green eyes. And next to Lily, Mr. Patterson from the hardware store, Father Thomas from St. Mary's, Mike Rodriguez from the Veterans Group, all the people who had played a part in his journey. "I was waiting to die," Jack continued, his voice dropping. "On that bench in the rain, I was hoping the cold would take me. I had nothing left to live for, or so I thought." He took a breath, steadying himself. "And then I met someone who changed everything. A 7-year-old girl who saw a wet, broken man on a bench and decided he was worth caring about. She didn't see my failures or my weakness. She didn't see the uniform or the medals or the missions. She saw a person, a sad person who needed help. And she refused to let me give up." Lily beamed at him from her seat, and Jack felt his heart swell with pride and gratitude. That girl taught me something important. She taught me that healing doesn't come from programs or medications. Though those things can help, healing comes from connection, from being seen, from having someone believe in you, even when you've stopped believing in yourself. He looked around the room at the veterans present, men and women he'd come to know through years of support group meetings and community work. Some of them had been in his position once, homeless, hopeless, waiting for an end. Some of them were still struggling, still fighting their own battles. They all understood. To my fellow veterans, I know the darkness you're in. I know the guilt, the pain, the feeling that you're beyond help. I know what it's like to wake up every morning wishing you hadn't. I know what it's like to push away everyone who tries to get close. I've been there. I lived in that darkness for 3 years. He paused, letting the words sink in. But I'm here to tell you that you're not beyond help. You are not beyond redemption. You are worth saving. You just need to find your person, or let them find you. Sometimes that person is a therapist or a counselor. Sometimes it's a fellow veteran who's been where you are. Sometimes it's a stranger who shows you unexpected kindness. And sometimes it's a little girl with a yellow umbrella who refuses to take no for an answer. Soft laughter rippled through the audience. 5 years ago, I made a promise to that little girl. I promised I would go somewhere warm, somewhere safe. That small promise became a bigger one, a promise to keep living, to keep trying, to keep showing up. Every day, I renew that promise. And every day, it gets a little easier to keep. He stepped back from the podium, his speech complete. The applause was thunderous, but Jack barely heard it. He was already making his way to his family, pulling Margaret into a hug and ruffling Lily's hair. "Not bad, bonus, Dad," Lily said, grinning, "but you got a little sappy at the end there." "Sappy is allowed at speeches," Jack replied. "It's in the rules." "What rules?" "Speech rules, look it up." Lily rolled her eyes in that way only a 12-year-old can, but she was smiling. They walked out of the community center together, the Reeves family, built not from blood, but from choice, from love, from the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. Outside, the sun was shining. It was a beautiful day in Cedar Falls, the kind of day that made you believe in possibilities. Jack took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the clean spring air. He thought about the man he used to be and the man he'd become. The journey between those 2 points had been long and painful, but he wouldn't trade it for anything. Because that journey had led him here, to this moment, to this family, to this life, and it had all started with a little girl and a yellow umbrella on a rainy night. "Come on," Lily said, tugging at his arm. "Mom promised ice cream if you didn't mess up your speech." "I didn't mess up," Jack protested. "The jury's still out." "I'll decide after the ice cream." Margaret laughed, linking her arm through Jack's. "Better get moving, Mr. Reeves. The judge is hungry." They walked to the ice cream shop together, the same one they visited every week, their footsteps falling into an easy rhythm. Along the way, people stopped to congratulate Jack on his speech, to shake his hand, to thank him for his service, both his military service and his service to the community. Jack accepted their words graciously, though he still felt uncomfortable with praise. He hadn't done anything special in his view. He'd just survived. He'd just kept showing up. He'd just let a little girl teach him how to live again. But maybe that was something special. Maybe just surviving, just showing up, just being willing to try. Maybe that was enough. Jack looked at his wife, at his daughter, at the life he'd somehow managed to build from the ruins of his past. He thought about his team, Martinez, Jackson, O'Brien, Davis, Williams. They were still with him, always would be. But now, instead of dragging him down into darkness, their memory lifted him up. He lived for them, made good choices for them, honored their sacrifice by refusing to waste the life they'd given him. Every morning he woke up and said their names, not in grief but in gratitude. "Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for your friendship." Thank you for making me the man I am today. I'll try to make you proud." And every morning in the quiet of his heart, he heard them answer, "We already are, Chief. We already are." "Hey, Jack," Lily said as they reached the ice cream shop. "Yeah? I'm proud of you. You know that, right?" Jack's throat tightened. "Yeah, kid, I know." "Good. Now buy me ice cream. Double scoop." "You got it." They went inside, the bell above the door chiming their arrival. The woman behind the counter smiled in recognition. They were regulars here, the veteran and his family, the living proof that redemption was possible. As Jack ordered their usual, chocolate for him, strawberry for Margaret, double chocolate chip for Lily, he marveled at the simple perfection of the moment. This was what life was supposed to be, not the darkness, not the pain, but this, connection, love, family. He'd almost missed it, almost let it slip through his fingers, but a 7-year-old girl with an umbrella had grabbed his hand and refused to let go, and that had made all the difference. Nobody could get through to the traumatized ex-Navy SEAL. Until a 7-year-old girl did the unthinkable. She saw him, really saw him, not the broken shell, not the homeless veteran, not the cautionary tale of what war does to men. She saw the person underneath all that pain, scared and hurt and desperately needing someone to care. And she cared. That's all it took in the end. One person caring, one person refusing to look away, one person believing that the wet, broken man on the bench was worth saving. Lily Chen had done what therapists and psychiatrists and well-meaning family members couldn't do. She'd reached through the walls Jack had built, not by trying to tear them down, but by simply holding out her hand and waiting for him to take it. She believed in him, and that was enough.